Welcome to Whisky Talk, Malts and Music, brought to you by the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, here in the vaults in Leith. My name is Vic Galloway. I'm a broadcaster, author, musician and music journalist, and the idea of this podcast is to bring together single cask strength whiskies and music. I ask creative people to pair up 4 drams with 4 pieces of music. We discuss their selections and we go off on tangents into their lives and careers. I hope you enjoy. Slàinte. Welcome to Malts and Music, Doug Johnstone.
Thank you very much, Vic.
Good to see you, pal.
Good to see you. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Yeah, esteemed crime writer, musician, all-round good egg, whiskey fan. Lots to talk about. We're pairing up music and whiskey as we always do on Malts and Music. Here at the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in the vaults in Leith, you're a member of the society and you've been a member in the past. Yeah?
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. In fact, I was at this very table for my mum's 80th birthday not very long ago.
Oh, wow.
That was amazing.
Cool. So whiskey's a thing for you. I mean, I know we'll talk about your books and the connection to whiskey in them, but how did you first kind of discover whiskey?
My dad. My dad was a whiskey drinker, still is. But yeah, that was kind of the only, I mean, when you're young, like drinking, I grew up in a drinking culture, and drinking all sorts of garbage, really, like cheap lager and cheap spirits and cheap wine. Mm-hmm. But he was drinking nice single malts, of which I was completely unaware, but just to smell them. And he liked particularly the sort of Isla stuff, really peaty stuff, and I just always loved them for some reason. And so when I was trying to be more grown up, in pubs and that, I would order a Lafroig or something like that, and it just stuck. I just love them since then. And
that's got to be what, 25, 30 years or something you've been doing that? Yeah, because some people are discovering whiskey now, especially the nicer stuff.
Sure.
But some people go back. I mean, previous guests have said, I started drinking nice whiskey when I was kind of late teens, early 20s. Not always that common though.
Yeah, it's not, because there wasn't really a culture of it. It wasn't as widely known about, I think. It was like a lot of, supermarket blends and bells and all that kind of stuff was kind of your go-to whiskey and cokes in the pub or whatever, which is fine, but it's like, it's a totally different kettle of fish to have a proper single malt, and then it's another level up for the kind of stuff, the single cask stuff that you get here, which is just kind of mind-blowing sometimes. Yeah,
so we've got 4 drams, 4 pieces of music, which you've paired up. I can say in advance that we've got 3 Speysides and a Taiwanese whiskey. I've not tried any of these yet, and I'm most excited, I think, about the Taiwanese one. I hope I like it. You have paired them all with tunes. Let's go for the first one, which is called Hoppy Madness. It's a 12.48 is the number, a second fill ex-IPA barrel. It's aged 10 years. It's a Speyside. It's 59.5%. It's part of this spicy and sweet profile. And just a couple of the tasting notes before we get stuck in. A prickly, hoppy, floral and spicy aroma awaited us. Elderflower cordial, lime juice, orange peel, raspberry ripple and pistachio parfait. On the palate, juicy lemons and oranges, chewy caramel and toffee flavours balanced out the very zingy grapefruit bitterness. And it goes on, but that gives us quite a... Like, we're getting sweetness and zinginess, so...
Yeah, definitely.
Right, Slàinte.
Cheers.
Good to see you.
And you.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Oh, I'm definitely getting the zingy sort of citrus.
Yeah, that was the first thing I got, was orange and lemon, like that sort of thing, citrusy stuff. But then, it's also like, I don't think it mentioned in that, I get sort of like grass or hay or something.
Yeah.
Hope it's not setting off my hay fever.
I think once, having just had a sip, the sweetness starts getting you actually, sometimes a whiskey you'll get the sweetness right at the front. I'm getting the zingy citrusiness at the front and then the sweetness towards the back of the palate.
Yeah.
Very quaffable. I mean, this would be a good whiskey for someone that doesn't necessarily adore whiskey to maybe take a first step into.
Yeah, it's a sort of entry-level whiskey for someone who isn't an aficionado, because I think it's Speyside, right? I think the Speyside ones are generally easier to drink than some of the other ones that are stronger tasting. This is definitely one of them, I think. But it's sort of summery.
Yes.
I think it feels like kind of... And also, I was getting like a kind of buttery taste to it as well. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's the caramel you mentioned, I think. Something like that.
Yeah, I'd like to sit down with the panel that do the tasting notes and all the descriptions and actually listen to them invent a description while tasting a whiskey for the first time. I think that would be absolutely fascinating. Because obviously this stuff leads, you know, whoever's tasting the whiskey quite often.
Yeah.
But if you're coming to them completely dry, as it were, without any description, you know, hopefully you'll come to some similar, you know, conclusions.
Yeah, I always think the tasting notes are amazing. I love the tasting notes.
Me too, yeah.
It's a kind of a linguist's dream. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, how are they even coming up with that?
Well, and you're a writer as well.
Know,
you must sort of either be annoyed by or enjoy the verbosity.
It's just, the thing is, it's the kind of language I could never put in my books.
Right.
Because it's too fancy, but it's great in this context, I think. It works really well. But if I was to write like that in the books, like, readers would just be chucking it away, going, get to the next bit of action, what are you doing?
Yeah, fair enough. Although there are some beautiful descriptions in your books as well. How is it with a bit of water? Do you advise?
Yeah, well, I always like a little bit of water, mostly. Yeah, my mate Bruce always says, wake it, don't drown it.
Yeah.
A little splash.
Yeah.
Because I think you get more of the nose, especially, and you can get more of the taste coming out from the water.
The nose definitely changed immediately.
Yeah.
It's a slightly less zingy nose and more sort of rounded. Let me try.
Yeah.
This podcast is going to
take... It's great for the podcast with lots of empty silence while we're like this.
And going, delicious.
Yes, it's great.
So, the first piece of music you've paired up with this particular whiskey is the Avalanches.
Yes.
Since I Left You.
Yeah.
I love this bit of music. Tell us why you went for that.
Well, because of that thing, it's got a citrusy and kind of grassy and hay. It just made me think of summer. Mm-hmm. And the Avalanches, this record, the album, Since I Left You, is like... It's quintessential summer for me. Mm-hmm. Like for the last 20 years, it's been my summer record, pretty much on and off. When I first heard this record, it's just like, well, you know, we both go back a long way about music.
Yeah.
And I'm always interested in stuff that changes your opinion about stuff. And I heard this record, and I'd never heard anything like it before in my life. I don't think anything had ever come out like it before. Because it's entirely made up of something insane like 3,500 samples.
That's what I've read somewhere, 3.5. So there's absolutely no live instrumentation on it.
No.
It's the only other record I know that's completely like that is Introducing by DJ Shadow. I'm sure there will be some other ones.
But the feel of this record, it feels like a sort of lost mixtape from the 1960s or something like that. It's amazing because it's these two guys. Well, there was more at the time. There's two of them now. Basically from Melbourne, going through junk shops, like, you know, picking up Hawaiian guitar records and stuff, just out of like charity shops, and just thousands and thousands of like records and samples, and just putting it together. And somehow, I mean, it could have been terrible, I guess, but there's some sort of brilliant artistic sensibility going on this, where they make a record that just sounds like, because it never stops, it's continuous, like 18, 20 songs that just fold into each other, and it just sounds like summer. It's beautiful and so chilled out. It's not like a hip hop record. It's like not quite a dance record. It's not like driving beats, but it's just a kind of, it just makes you feel like you're on holiday.
It's a sunshine pop record.
Yeah.
And anyone that maybe is slightly cynical about music technology and it's not real music unless there's a guitar in it, or unless there's, you know, it's real musicians playing real instruments. This is a great record to throw those, you know, assumptions out the window, because it is incredibly musical. It's
unbelievable. I mean, they were a band first. They played instruments, I think. I'm listening to an oral history of the album at the moment, because I went back to like listening to this again. And they were a band. They were a kind of like Beastie Boys, but they played their instruments and they were kind of doing chaotic live shows. And then this album came out of nowhere. Spent 18 months just in a studio with thousands of records and came up with this. And it is absolutely about having an artistic sensibility. These songs were written by them and curated by them in every sense of the word. They've made this singular piece of dance art, if you like.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think it's awesome. I don't think it's ever, and it was this kind of a snapshot in time. They didn't release another record for like 16 years.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
They've got more albums now, which are both amazing, but are not the same as this, because they were older and they're kind of, and the technology they were kind of hamstrung, I think, by the technology at the time, so they could only do so much. And I think they didn't pay a lot of the legal fees for that.
Well, I was just about to say that. I think copyright law is a lot different now. I think they got in at the tail end of the joys of sampling, when you could kind of nick bits of other people's records and blend them all together, and no one really knew what was going on. And
before the lawyers got on hold of it.
I think if you sample a famous record now, you're paying large sums of money for it.
I mean, there's only about one or two famous samples that you'll recognise on this whole record. There's a Madonna one, and there's a Cool in the Gang one, I think, and that's about it. But the rest of it is just random crazy stuff they found, which is it boggles my mind. I can't think how you would go about that, how creating that sort of thing. Which I think is endlessly impressive.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I loved it when it came out as well. I was on the radio by that point as well. It was 2001, and yeah, I can remember playing this particular track, which is the title track, but also one of the singles. But it's as you say, dip into it, really enjoy it. And as you were saying before, it's a summery, zesty whiskey. This, it does. I've never been to Australia, but I could imagine myself sitting on a beach in Australia with this dram, listening to that record.
Yeah. Do they make whiskey in Australia? I'm sure they do.
They probably do. If not, we'll bring a bottle with us. Tell us a bit about your love of music. How did you first get into music? Are you from a musical family?
No, I'm not from a musical family. I was a musician. I was a drummer not a musician, a drummer. Joke there. From the very early age, like 5 or 6 or something like that. My mum and dad. I used to drum on the sofa with knitting needles, in time to stuff on top of the pops. And I think my parents bought me a drum just to get me to shut up and go.
Just a snare to begin with.
Yeah, a snare and a cymbal. Yeah, and that was it to begin with. And I just loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved all music. I was a real musical omnivore right from the start. Like my first love was like, Adam and the Ants and Madness and stuff like that. The pop music that was at the time.
We're of a similar age. Same for me.
Yeah. But I also had an older brother and sister, and my brother was listening to Motorhead and the Sex Pistols and Rush and the Jam. So this is all amazing. And my sister was listening to ABBA and like all sorts of other and pop stuff. And I was just like, this is all amazing. Yeah. I'm just soaking it all up. And I've kind of always been that way. I've kind of gone down different routes. So I drummed in bands at school. And then at university, around about when we met, actually, on 3-band bills in the Cas Rock,
subway,
Cafe, places like that.
Venue in the subway,
all these kind of places where we used to be in bands together. I always loved it. It's such a good vibe. Just creating something, just making something out of nothing. Writing your own songs and getting up there to 50 folk, your mates, and just having a party.
Yeah. And what about if you're going to buy, as a music fan, you're obviously still listening to music. A lot of people my age, they tail off maybe in their early 30s, and then you just go, music's not as good as it used to be. You're always going to love the stuff that you loved as a teenager in your 20s and so on. But you keep up with, new music and new releases. And what do you prefer? Do you do the streaming thing, or are you a vinyl nerd? Or?
I'm a streamer. I'm not. I would love to say that I'm out there searching through the record shelves and getting vinyl, but I'm not. I think streaming's actually great, because I think when I was a music journalist for about 20 years, and that kind of got me in the mood for kind of keeping up to date with stuff. But it's a weird thing, for a little while after I kind of gave that up, when the books, the fiction writing started to take off, I kind of stopped doing that, and it was such a relief not to have to keep up.
Yeah.
But I didn't really listen to anything new for a few years, but then I came back to it. And now I think, because of streaming stuff, that my tastes are more eclectic, much more eclectic than they were, I think, back in the day, because I was kind of an indie kid.
Yeah.
And that was my main turf, for listening to indie rock and stuff like that, with other bits and bobs. But now I think, I listen to a lot of ambient electronica, as well as hip hop, as well as some even slightly jazzy stuff, and lots of rock, and just, I kind of right across the board.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know, I think I'm more open-minded about music than I was.
Ian Rankin famously likes to write to music, and but he tends to have sort of ambient stuff, whether it be Mogwai or Boards of Canada or something Eno or something like that, just kind of throbbing away in the background as he kind of imagines stuff. Do you do something similar?
Yeah, very similar. There's a handful of sort of neoclassical composers that I listen to, like Johan Johansson, basically anything by him, Max Richter as well, get that on. There's a guy, Alex Summers, who's done albums with Johnsy from Sigur Rós.
Okay, right.
Who's done loads of soundtrack albums as well, which is a similar kind of thing. That it's nothing too nice. Like, you don't want it to be. You want it to be slightly disturbing.
Yeah,
it kind of puts you off a little bit, or gives you, like, for example, the soundtrack to one of my favourite movies, Arrival. I love listening to that because it's quite odd. Johan Johansson did that. There's like little weird sort of vocal things that sort of jump out at you, because it's about aliens and weird stuff.
Yeah, I've seen it, yeah.
I don't want to be too. I think something that makes you feel like a little bit I don't know if it makes me create anything more edgy, but it makes me feel like I'm not set in my groove, that I'm just going to write the same old stuff.
Okay, yeah, it sort of jolts you out of your comfort zone a little bit. Right, that's interesting. And how about, you grew up in Arbroath. Mm-hmm. How was growing up there? I mean, I'm from the East Coast as well, from down a bit, from Fife, but was it a good place to grow up? I can imagine sort of a lot of wandering far and wide and being fairly free to sort of let your imagination run wild.
Yeah, it was a lovely place growing up, actually. Looking back on it, it was it's weird, it's sort of incredibly parochial in one sense. Like, for me, the big city was Dundee.
Right.
Like, I was like, oh, we're going to go to Dundee, woohoo!
Yeah.
That was a big day out. And I didn't even really have a concept of, like, Edinburgh and Glasgow or bigger cities, or, God forbid, London. Mm-hmm. That was a weekend on one holiday in my teens or something like that. So it was kind of it was fine. I lived across the road from, like, the Ketty Pond, and which I used to fall in regularly in the winter when it iced over, and like just hanging out at the beaches and hanging about in the parks, and it was like, it's absolutely fine.
And did you have pals that were kind of interested in music and that kind of stuff as well?
A bit, not as much. I was in a couple of bands at school, but they weren't really as much into it. I kind of just loved everything. I would listen to anything.
Yeah.
And I would spend loads of time on my own in record shops. Makes me sound like a sad loser, obviously. but just
me
like
too.
Yeah, but just looking at the record sleeves, because I couldn't afford to buy them sometimes and stuff like that. In the case of Arbroath, there wasn't a record shops. It was either Alina May or John Menzies. That's where you got your that's where you got your records. So my mates, even the ones that I was in a band with, weren't that much into it, I don't think. So it was only when I got to university that I kind of found folk who were really like mad about music the same as I was.
Mm-hmm. I'm nearing the end of this dram. Should we move on to dram number 2?
Sure.
That was absolutely delicious. Hoppy Madness.
Oh, yeah.
I wonder why it's called Hoppy Madness. Maybe because it makes you want to hop around on a summer's day. It didn't have a hoppy, as in hops, flavour to it.
No, I'm not. One of my bugbears about modern beer drinking is how everything's so incredibly hoppy. It's like, everything's pale ales, it has to be triple hopped. I'm like, maybe you don't all...
Yeah, single hop's fine.
Yeah, or maybe no hops,
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, so that wasn't hoppy tasting, I didn't think.
Not at all. No, I think the title maybe is a misnomer, but it's certainly those tasting notes that I read out, and just, going into that whiskey there, definitely on the right track, and a great tune to start us off.
Cheers.
The Avalanches, Since I Left You. Check out that album and, of course, that song. Moving on to dram number 2, which is The Magic Is So Strong, and another excellent title. It's a cask-wise second fill ex-bourbon. It's aged 26 years, which immediately makes you think, this is going to be good. It's a Speyside. It's 53.9%, so 6% lighter than the last one, and it's part of the sweet, fruity and mellow flavour profile. I'll read a few of the tasting notes. The magic is so strong. Miraculously, we were transported to the Caribbean, to be precise, to the island of Antigua, and there to Nelson's dockyard in the marina called English Harbour, with the non-existing 1 o'clock gun being fired. Imagination is a wonderful thing. We enjoyed a scoop of blood orange and honey sorbet, as well as rum and raisin ice cream on a chocolate waffle cone. There you go. A picture drawn in our minds, and a couple of little flavoury, profile notes there as well. So, what did you think of this?
I loved it. One of the things I noticed is there's not a lot on the nose.
Yeah.
It's quite unusual that you'd expect if it's, what did you say, 26 years?
Yeah, you'd think it'd be very...
you get more
the closer I get in, I'm sticking my nose right into the
sniff right into the microphone, yeah.
Yeah. It's quite a delicate nose. You're quite,
But it is, if you have a taste, it's definitely...
Yeah, try a bit more water first.
See, that's quite creamy, I think. Like a honey, vanilla, something like that, maybe.
The rum and raisin ice cream is coming out. Mm-hmm.
It's smooth. It's kind of quite a very smooth kind of taste, isn't it?
It is quite smooth, yeah. There's a little harshness towards the back of the mouth. Like, I think the alcohol kicks in a little bit. But, that's very nice. It's quite different from dram number 1. Actually, in a weird way, I would say the first one was spicy and sweet profile, but I think it was maybe a little bit more fruity and mellow.
Yeah.
Whereas this one tastes a little bit spicier to me.
Well, I think this, you could say this is fruity, but it's not like citrusy. It's more like kind of ripe fruit, like mangoes or something like that, or melon.
Well, and they made that Caribbean reference as well. So, and you paired this one up with Little Simz.
With Little Simz, Point and Kill.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge hip hop fan. I love bits of it here and there, but it's not really where I come from originally. But I first came across Little Simz maybe a year or two ago on like one of these NPR tiny desks. She did a tiny desk thing.
Yep.
These gigs that are kind of acousticy.
Like a sort of live session in a small room.
Stripped back, It wasn't in it because it was during lockdown, so it was just their own studio or whatever they did it in. And I was just blown away. There was like about 10 of them, and it was one of those, because sometimes hip hop artists come out with just the backing track and just do their thing. Fine, great, that works. But this was like a full band, and when they get like the best session soul guys in, and like the band were absolutely incredible, and 3 backing singers, and they did a few songs, and then they played this, and it's got a sort of lead vocal by a Nigerian guy called Obongjayar. Obongjayar, I think I hope I'm saying that right. Who came on and sang it, and he's just got this incredible like falsetto voice. Yes. Which is like, it totally blows you away, and it worked really well with her voice. And then not long after that, I sort of started listening to the album, which is Sometimes I Might Be Introvert. It's called, which is like crazy good. It's probably my favourite album last year.
I would agree. It's an excellent record.
It's sort of like orchestral. It's like a concept album. It's like orchestral at times, but there's some really hard driven like dance stuff in it, and also some really poignant things and loads of strings and kind of orchestration. And some amazing vocals, and Little Simz, doing her stuff over everything. It's incredible. And
Little Simz is London-based, but of Caribbean descent. So
Nigerian, I think.
Is it Nigerian descent?
So, yeah.
But she has that sort of dance hall patois that comes into her rhymes as well.
And in this song especially, I don't know. And then when I watched the video, have you seen the video for this?
No, I haven't. No.
It's absolutely brilliant. It's just her and this guy and the singer like riding about on a motorbike in Nigeria with a machete.
Oh right, okay.
And it's quite full on. And at the end they get arrested by the police, but it's fairly uncompromising,
right?
Like a lot of her stuff is.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's very. I mean, she's on a mission. She's got her own kind of take on London life and life as a young black woman in the UK, and the trials and tribulations she goes through. But it's also full of melodies and ideas and hooks.
Yeah, really joyous. And this song, because I kind of thought this was kind of tropical, this whiskey. Yeah. That's what kind of made me think of this song, because it feels like, because it's basically an incessant beat going through it. Just it's one riff all the way through the song that they just sing over, and it just it feels like a sweaty club in Lagos or something like that.
Right.
It feels great. Yeah.
I've never actually been to Lagos.
Well, no, me neither. If Nigerian Airlines want to
sponsor us to go there to watch music, it's a place rich in music culture as well. I can see how you might pair Little Simz up with this whiskey as well. She's a stunning artist. She won a Brit Award recently, Best Newcomer. She's been Mercury nominated. Her previous album, Grey Area, I love that as well. And I think she's slowly but surely getting the kudos she deserves. And again, people, you might not know that much or like hip hop or dancehall that much. I think this is a great entry record because it's full of different textures and flavors as well. It's quite listenable. There's almost, was that track Woman on there? It's string laden,
beautiful soul, kind of soul song. Yeah, and there's but what makes me work, because it's such a complete work. Much like the Avalanches, it kind of feels like a contained album because it's a concept. But also makes me wonder what the hell she's going to do next. But then, she's so incredibly talented that I'm sure she'll come up with something. But it just feels like a mass. This is a breakthrough record for her, I guess.
Yeah, since I might sometimes I might be introvert. It's SIMBA, which is a sort of an acronym for her name, Simba, I think so, or her nickname. I think that's her nickname. I'm going to add a bit of water to this. What about the first few gigs you went to? That kind of thing.
Gigs I went to, right? So I was in a rock, a metal-y kind of thing, and as a teenager, the first gig I ever went to was Marillion at the Glasgow Apollo. Sadly, no longer with us.
Right.
I bunked off double French at school and got the bus through to Glasgow. I went to see Marillion because by that time my sister was at university in Glasgow, so I stayed with her.
Okay,
Quite
cool.
nice.
Yeah.
And then I was just kind of going to gigs, kind of on my own, cause like from school. I went to see Dio was the second gig I went to. So
I remember doing I was in a band at school. It was the 6-year band, and I was in the 5th year, so it was like a real honour to be asked to play. And then they played loads of music which I didn't particularly like, but we did "Rainbow in the Dark" by Dio. Like a rainbow in the dark. Yeah, but yeah. Impressive gigs. I mean, friends of mine are huge Marillion fans as well. Like, I've got a friend that's in the Marillion fan club.
Right, okay.
And so he goes to, when they do these events in Butlins or whatever, and to see them at that point, I'm not sure he sort of was aware of them at that point. Glasgow Apollo, that must have been pretty impressive.
Yeah, well, that would have been maybe around about the second album. I mean, I had bought the script for A Jester's Tear when it came out.
Right.
Fugazi was the second album. But I loved all that stuff because, I mean, me and you have talked about this before. You know, I kind of got a lifelong love of prog, which kind of doesn't. It's never the most. It's not, you don't say that in polite company sometimes.
Oh no, critics hate it still.
But I always loved it. Partly as a drummer, like because it's so like complicated. I used to listen to like Genesis records and stuff like that. And think, I'm trying to work out what the hell they're doing. Rush was a huge thing for me. You know, at one point I could drum every Rush song. As a teenage boy, which was incredibly impressive to no one except me. Yeah. And didn't get me a girlfriend, but I was like, well, I was well chuffing myself. But I just loved all that stuff. I'm mucking about in 9/8 time and 5/4, and here we go.
Yeah.
And Marillion were the same. And I'm looking back on it, some of it is kind of pretentious nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, I came to prog later on. I was very tribal. Prog was an absolute no-no for me, in my all the way through my teens. It was only really as my mind started opening, beyond that in my 20s, that I started embracing math rock, post-rock, prog rock, whatever things in 9/8 and so on, and just realised, and jazz. I'm a huge jazz fan now. But you sometimes you get there as a teenager, sometimes you find it later in life, sometimes you never find it at all.
Yeah. But it seems weird because people sort of say, well, I've never understood. I mean, I was also kind of tribal. There was a tribalism. I mean, there genuinely was like a kind of mods and rockers thing when I grew up in Arbroath, where like a bunch of folk were into AC/DC and a bunch of folk were into Jam, and I was like, it's the same thing. It's like it's rock music. What are you not getting? And they hated each other, and I was like, what? I don't understand that at all. I couldn't get my head around that. And it's fine to like also to love Rush, but also Ace of Spades,
yes,
by Motorhead, and also the Avalanches, and also something else. I mean, of course, it's all just. I remember saying. And people hated the kind of music. I remember Lauren Laverne said something once. It's like, if somebody else is eating a meal that you don't like, you don't come over and berate them for it. Yeah. Why are you eating that for? It's garbage. It's like, it's their taste. It's what they want to eat.
Although, unfortunately, I think people do things like that on the internet anyway. How dare you eat that?
Oh, God bless social media. Yeah, that's...
I feel exactly the same when it comes to music now. I mean, I still like good criticism, and I like people defending what they like and why they like it, and I also like people being critical in a negative way. If they really dislike something and are eloquent about it, then that's always quite interesting as well, and funny often.
Well, what I used to find as a music journalist was that I would quite often listen to a record and think, and then I would interview the artist, and it would immediately make me respect what they'd done more. Like, irrespective of who they were, really, because actually they had put time and effort and all that stuff in it. And when I first started as a journalist, I could be quite snippy and dismissive about stuff. I think it just goes with being younger and kind of just wanting to make your mark and stuff. But I certainly wouldn't be like that now. And I guess I was the same with books. I used to sometimes, I used to get annoyed if someone liked a book. It's like, well, that doesn't matter. That's their choice. Now I think, well, whoever it is, whatever the book is, they spent X number of months or years making that thing, and somebody saw fit to publish it. Just leave it alone. It's somebody else's thing. Yeah,
we'll get into books and stuff in a second. You've mentioned journalism a couple of times. You've got a diploma in journalism, and for many years you were an active, journalist making your living out of it. But the one thing we haven't really touched on, which I always think is quite fascinating, is that you've got a degree in physics and a PhD in nuclear physics.
Yes, I do.
I mean, when you've gone through all that training, and that's intense stuff. I mean, when someone says, "Oh, it's not brain surgery or it's not nuclear physics," actually, you could go, "Well, I understand nuclear physics as it happens." Why do all that training and go into that world, and then sort of eventually reject it.
Oh, man. I mean, we've got a time constraint, haven't we? I've got
a little time constraint.
I can't talk for too long about it. Well, I mean, I loved physics as a kid. You know, I loved maths and physics especially because it was kind of that idea of the big answers, how the universe works, that sort of stuff, and space and everything else. And I kind of did my degree and I really enjoyed that. My PhD, I was part of a bigger group of people doing like experiments for nuclear physics. So it was kind of a small part of a bigger team. Most of my day job was just number crunching and like data processing and stuff like that.
Did you not end up designing missile guidance systems and radar and things like that, or being part of a team?
Kind of, yeah. I worked for 4 years as a systems engineer for Marconi, as was then, who I was mostly I used to do mathematical simulations of like radar systems and sometimes missile guidance systems, yeah. But I hated that job. That was the graduate office job I got after my PhD, and I just hated it. And at the same time, I was still in bands, and I was running a little fanzine that we were putting out in pubs and interviewing bands and stuff like that. And I started to get things published in like mainstream press, like gig reviews and things like that. And I just thought, I'll never make I need more time to make a go of this. That's what I wanted to do. Yeah. So I quit my high-paid graduate office job and became a freelance music writer.
And let's be honest, I'm still a music journalist and broadcaster and all the rest of it. It's tough earning a living doing it. So to go from nuclear physics and Marconi and well paid and potentially a job that could develop into something very well paid to like going and doing gigs on a Tuesday night, reviewing gigs at the art school or whatever.
But it was honestly one of the best decisions I've ever made. Honestly, it was like it meant that I was doing something I enjoyed for a living, and also it freed up because I was writing fiction then, occasional stories, but coming in from a day of work, it just saps your energy, and I wasn't really finding the time to do it. And even though I was much busier, basically hustling for work as a freelance writer, I was writing for a living. I was learning my craft. And I was like energized by it. I was going out to gigs loads, I was writing reviews, I was interviewing bands, start to pick up other things like restaurant reviews, book reviews, films, general cultural stuff. And it was great, I was loving it, and I started to take my own fiction writing seriously. So I honestly don't think any of that would have happened if I'd stayed at the office job.
Yeah, well, that's very honest and as you say, transformative. How are you getting on with the dram?
Yeah, almost done, I think.
Me too. I'm glad you're drinking them at the same pace as me. It doesn't always happen.
I wasn't gonna, but it turns out
they're so delicious.
I quite like whiskey.
I've added some water to this, and it has completely opened it out. And although the alcohol content of this one is far less than the Hoppy Madness, I think it's actually a little bit feels more alcohol-y to me, and maybe that's the rum and raisiny thing that keeps coming back to me. But I think with a spot of water, it just rounds it off a little bit. It's nice. Cheers, Doug.
Cheers.
Very pleasant indeed. Let's move on to dram number 3 and tune number 3. A little palate cleanser there. Right, we've moved on to Terra Firma, which could well be a prog rock song title. I would imagine it probably is. It's a first fill ex-Oloroso hogshead cask, aged 14 years. The alcohol content is 60.3%. And it's a Speyside again, and a few of the tasting notes here. A spicy and leathery profile at first nosing, hot cross buns, cured game meats, aged Pinot Noir, and sautéed forest mushrooms. We also had a sense of leaf mulch, petrichor, and hoisin sauce. Water brought further meaty vibes such as beef jerky, rib glaze, Hessian, putty, and jasmine tea. There's all sorts. Lots of those flavour notes. If I was reading them, if I was in the vaults here at the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, and I was like, "Ooh, not had Terra Firma before." Those tasting notes would make me go, "Dram of that, please," immediately. Yeah. This sounds like the sort of thing I'm going to like. What did you think of it?
Yeah, it's got more personality. It's got stronger flavours definitely than
the nose is definitely much more character.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on there. I definitely got like meat of some kind.
You're right. You read those tasting notes. If you're a vegetarian, you might be like, "Oh, I'm not having that," or I don't know what those things taste.
I think there was something like I could smell. This makes me sound really pretentious, like tarmac or something. Or
yeah, no. It says putty, and I'm getting a bit of that on the nose. I'm not getting the meatiness on the nose anyway, but I'm getting Pinot Noir a little bit, and the putty kind of.
Yeah.
Right. Nose is complex and interesting. And let's try the taste. Oh wow.
It's really nice, isn't it?
It's really nice, but it's also by far the most flavoursome to me anyway. I mean, as if it needs explaining, this is also subjective. The idea of tasting something and having a definitive, you know, this is exactly what it tastes like is absurd. And also the idea of pairing it up with a bit of music is mad as well. It's like you may pair it up with the next tune, someone else may pair it up with something completely different. What have you gone for this time? Spoon?
Well, yes, Spoon, and a very recent song of theirs, Hell. It's not their song, it's a cover version.
Oh, is it? Right, okay.
Yes, so Spoon are a band from Austin, Texas, which you obviously know. Britt Daniels, lead singer. And I kind of first came across them years and years ago with their album Girls Can Tell, which I thought was an absolutely amazing record because it just didn't sound like a guitar band. It just sounded like, it reminded me of Afghan Wigs, who I was a huge fan of back in the day. And that there was something soulful about what they were doing, and there was lots of space in the music, and there was kind of really inventive and weird things they were doing. And I was kind of kept in touch with them on and off over the years, but they always bring out something like the last 2-3 records have been like really surprising, which I think is great because they're on like about album 10 now or something like that.
Yeah,
you know?
I think this is album 10.
Okay, and I
What's
love
it called
that
again? Lucifer on the Sofa.
On the Sofa, yeah. I mean,
is that a lockdown reference? You know, was he badly behaved in the house?
But I love that kind of thing. There are other bands that are kind of that get to that stage and they're just kind of putting out more or less the same record over and over again. And there are bands like Spoon and Low's another favourite of mine who are just putting out the best records of their career.
I agree with Low.
I almost picked a Low song for this because this feels like it's kind of quite in your face and it's kind of doing something, different. But the Spoon. So this song is the first record on the new album, the first song on the new album, and it's a cover of the Smog song.
Right. Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I'm going to give you my tuppence worth on Spoon in that I've always been aware of them. I've always quite liked them, and I know very little about them. And they've always played, as you mentioned, Austin, Texas. I've been to South by Southwest many times. I've been just on holiday to visit friends in Austin. I love the city. They're always playing. They're always at festivals. They're always in one of the big venues. People love them. And yet, you can't like or know about all the music. And they're a band that have slightly gone over my head a little bit. I listened to this, obviously, on your recommendation, just to make sure I knew what it sounded like, having not dipped into this record. I loved it. Yeah. It's basically a 3-chorder.
Yeah.
And it's got real momentum. It builds and builds and builds.
Yeah. So it's weirdly, I couldn't believe that they were like, it's a brand new record. They thought, we'll do a cover version of a Smog song. And this is from a Smog album from 20 years ago, Knock Knock. It was one of the best. Smog is Bill Callahan.
Yeah, he's out doing it again. He's playing quite soon. Yeah,
and this was one of probably my favourite song of Smog's. And so I put this on, and they started playing it. I was like, I recognise that riff because it's a very distinctive riff. You know, they've got this thing going on, but it's a really simple kind of bluesy, like you say, a 3-chord thing. But they build it and build it and build it in a way that Smog doesn't because it's one man and he's just kind of doing this thing. And they just made it their own. It's kind of like, it's a really distinctive original, but they've somehow made it new. And to stick that as your first song on your album, you're like making a statement saying, you don't care, I'm doing this cover.
I think because they may be more critically acclaimed in the States, but I don't think they're not a hype band. They're not a zeitgeist band. No. Spoon. They just sort of exist, and I think the pressure's off, so they just do what they want. Yeah. Why did it go well with this particular whiskey?
I don't know, because I think because they always put their own stamp on stuff. They have got a lot of personality, I think, in the band when you see them live, and that kind of struck me with this. And this, it's kind of in your face. It's not shy about what it is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of doing its own thing.
It is a flavoursome piece of music, if I'm allowed to say that.
Like to make that cheesy pun. Yeah,
I know, but it is. It has depth.
Yeah.
You know, it's initially you're like, oh, this sounds quite traditional, and then it sort of builds and builds. I can see that with this whiskey. Although right at the beginning on the nose for this, I was like, right, this is complex. This is flavoursome. This is full of attitude. Yeah. But this is a song with attitude as well. Journalism, we've established you did that for a good few years. I mean, best part of a decade maybe, or like a lot of...
The music journalism, at least a decade. I still do bits and bobs of literary journalism. I still do some book reviews and things like that, just keep my hand in.
But you're an esteemed crime writer. You're now you're about to put out book number 14?
Yes, indeed.
Which is no mean feat. I mean, the first one, when did the first one come out? 2006?
Yes.
Tombstoning?
Tombstoning.
So within 16 years, you've put out, well, the next one comes out in September.
Yeah.
14 books in 16 years. I mean, that is good going.
I'm slacking a minute. I need to get up to a book a year. I'm gonna have to. Well, I've got 2 coming out.
Is ranking a book a year? He's not far off. A book every 2 years.
Well,
maybe.
he definitely does a book. Well, he's now big enough to take a year off every now and then.
Yeah.
Which to recharge his batteries, which I understand. But yeah, it's like so. It's it's going well. I can't complain.
Tell me why crime writing? Because I mean, there's Scotland is now famous for its crime writing and has been for many years. What drew you to it?
Well, nothing. I didn't realise I was a crime writer until someone else said I was, round about book 3 or something like that. I think that's quite common for quite a lot of writers. I didn't really understand what different genres of fiction were, to be honest. I was much like the music we talked about earlier. I kind of read everything. I was reading science fiction and fantasy and mainstream stuff, and my dad used to be an English teacher, so there was lots of literary fiction around the house and poetry. And plays, he's big into theatre, and I read crime fiction as well, and I just kind of thought it was all part of a thing. I didn't really understand that. I mean, it's very naive looking back on it, that I wouldn't be like sort of pigeonholed into one thing or another. I mean, the first book had dead bodies in it, so it's probably going to be a crime novel. Yeah, I always loved crime fiction. There are a whole bunch of writers, like the one from Scotland is obviously a touchstone is William McIlvanney that everyone talks about. You totally changed the face of Scottish crime fiction, but I was more interested in kind of the classic American noir canon of like James M. Cain and Dashiell Hammett and Chandler and stuff like that. I used to love those guys. Jim Thompson. But I've always been really interested in, of those books, the kind of ones that are more, what I would call more noir than crime, in that they're about the criminals or the victims or the repercussions. I've never written a police detective in a book. And partly because there are plenty of people who are doing that rather well.
Yeah.
And partly because I couldn't be bothered doing the research about trying to find out how police
officers work. Fair enough.
That forensic shit and whatever. Leave that to someone else. But I kind of always written about basically ordinary people thrown into extraordinary circumstances, and that invariably involves some kind of crime. I think it's weird that the crime fiction genre is so big now. Like almost every literary novel now is actually a crime novel, because that's the kind of thing. Because all fiction thrives on conflict and tension, no matter what it is, and that's just more to the fore in crime fiction. So it's hard to know where you'd even put the boundary if there is one. So I think I'm in that grey area and that sort of hinterland.
And without giving all your tricks away, I mean, when planning a new novel, do you have a sort of blackboard or a whiteboard or whatever with this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, and this is the main plot, this is the subplot, this is the secondary subplot, and then you combine them all, or do you just sort of freestyle it and see what happens?
I'm somewhere in the middle. I always used to plan the start quite meticulously and the end, and then leave the middle kind of vague so that I wasn't quite sure how I was going to get from one to the other. I do have a sort of corkboard now with index cards on them for the most recent 3 books have been about the Skells.
The Skells, yeah.
So it's 3 different points of view, 3 different main characters, and lots of different plot lines happening. So they're colour-coded and numbered as well for the plots and the characters.
And I suppose you have to remember what you've written about these characters
for previous books. Yeah. Do you know what? Because I know that in TV, and they have a Bible, so it's called a Bible. So it's basically what every character's done in the past. I really wish I'd fucking had the foresight to do that, because now I'm thinking, shit, have they done that in book 1? What's her brother's name?
And you don't want to have to go back you have to go back and read your own book.
I spend a lot of time flicking through the PDF searching for things of the first book going, what happened there?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a nightmare, all that backstory. But I having said that about the corkboard and the index cards, I still leave it quite vague. I sort of plan it by almost by act. The first act, second act, I have things that need to happen, but I have these I print it out. It's basically a list of scenes, but that kind of always gets scribbled over and changed, and I've got like exclamation marks saying this is fucking rubbish, and move this here, or they wouldn't do that, or something needs to go in here, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very movable plan.
Because I have aspirations to start writing fiction, having written a couple of books on music. And I just always wonder, have you ever sort of like planned the beginning, planned the end, and then as you're writing the middle, as it were, you go, actually that end's wrong, and completely change the end?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I won't talk about specifics, to be spoilers, but the jump, I had a whole thing, dramatic ending, planned out, and when it got to it, I was like, the logistics of that don't make sense. Like, those characters wouldn't behave in that circumstance, and they logistically couldn't do those things that I had planned because I've written it differently. So you had to come up with someone else. So that's just what you have to do. You have to come up with someone else.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about whiskey, and we've already established you've been a whiskey fan for many years. You have a book which is, you know, a noir thriller, if you like, but with whiskey as its kind of central character in a way.
Yeah.
Or certainly, you know, central theme.
Yeah.
Smokeheads.
Yes, so that was my third novel. It came out in 2011 now. So it's basically, the elevator pitch is it's Whiskey Galore meets Deliverance.
Yeah.
It's not actually that. It's more like Sideways, like the wine movie, but with whiskey meets Deliverance. Because it's about four guys who go to Islay, one who is a kind of amateur whiskey nut who wants to open up a new distillery there, and things go badly wrong. Let's put it that way.
I went to the launch of that, and there was Smokeheads glasses were given out.
Yeah.
I still have it, and one of the few glasses I haven't dropped or smashed.
I've got one left as well. Yeah, because Smokehead whiskey, which comes from Islay, they sponsored it, and it was great. So it was fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, so that
I didn't just name the book Smokehead so they would sponsor it.
Yeah, no, but that must have been a really good thing to be able to combine. And you've also combined music and noir with the Ossians, and you know, it must have been quite nice to put one of your loves of life, whiskey, into a book.
Yeah, I was just really interested in that because I was having a juxtaposition, because the main character is kind of a whiskey snob, a little bit. In the similar way to Sideways, the main character is a kind of wine snob, and I wanted to play a little bit with that whole idea, you know, whether, you know, because people can get very pretentious about eating and drinking sometimes, but actually the good stuff is still the good stuff. So how do you come to it, and what is your approach to that thing? So there's a couple of characters who just approach the drinking of whiskey very differently. And also I was kind of having a go a little bit at the sort of collecting culture, like, you know, you get the sort of white label that fell off the back of a lorry somewhere that's, you know, worth thousands of pounds and that sort of stuff, but is it really any good to drink, or is it any better than...
So debunking the myth of the Emperor's New Clothes.
Well, I just think it's really interesting. Just because something's rare doesn't mean it's good, and that sort of thing. I was so fascinated by that idea of the whole whiskey culture. And if you go to Islay, if anyone's ever been to Islay, it's an incredible place, you know, but it is absolutely a whiskey island. You know, there's like, well, at the time it was maybe 7, I can't remember, there's more than that distilleries now. I mean, there's only 3,000 people there, so they pretty much all are involved in tourism or whiskey. That's the two things that they do. And
Did you do your research?
Oh, I went for a good research trip, yes.
Without any dead bodies?
Starting from one. Yeah, but a part of it is you have to work out, you know, you go and taste the whiskies and look at the tours and all that stuff, but also like, well, where can I put a dead body where no one's going to find it for X number of hours, and where can I get no phone signal? That's quite helpful. Out in the ocean.
So if anyone was read your book and wanted to test you, well, he was right.
I think you'll find.
I don't think I would have found the body in there for a couple of days.
Can they roll a barrel with a dead body in it that far? Well, yeah. I didn't quite try that.
Fascinating. I mean, that's another great part of writing a book, I would imagine, is once you've got the initial concept, is putting the research in. I've just opened this up with a little bit of water as well, and I think it works brilliantly because it is so flavoursome. With a bit of water, it sort of opens it into even more flavours. Great stuff. It is a podcast. We could be here for 2 or 3 hours, so let's move on to dram number 4, tune number 4. The current book is The Great Silence. The new one that's coming out September is Black Hearts.
Yes.
Don't want to give too much away, but again, noirish. I mean, that's your thing. Have you got, not that you fall into a kind of routine, but do you have certain rituals that you go through when writing a new book?
Well, I'm more, because the last 3 books have been part of a trilogy, which is now a quadrilogy, I guess, because I've written a 4th one. But they're kind of, my approach to them has been slightly different in terms of writing, because they were definitely a deliberate attempt to try and expand my writing skills and extend my interest. Because before that, I'd written 10 standalone books, which were kind of fairly linear, and usually one character is kind of central. You're in their heads. But these books are kind of deliberately much more expansive, looking at much more complicated ideas from different points of view. Because the basic setup is it's 3 generations of women who have to take over the running of a funeral directors and a private investigators when the patriarch of the family dies. So there's a grandmother, a mother and a daughter. And so the book 4 that's coming out now is like, I can't really talk about it because it's on fourth in a series, because it's like there's so many spoilers from the first.
People that have got this far, they don't want to. They're champing at the bit to get into it.
But it's interesting because I really was resistant to the idea of writing a series for a long time, and I don't really know why.
Is it a useful thing? Is it kind of there's more to tell in this story?
It means you can go deeper with the characters, and you've got much more. What I've found is it's been really interesting is that the response to these books, the Skelf's books, it's her name Skelf, is that from readers is that it's absolutely about the characters. They love these 3 women in a way that they don't think they had that emotional attachment to. In these standalone books, the previous characters standalone books, and I was thinking about it, and it's like no one really says, "Oh, I love that plot. Oh, I fell in love with that plot." No one falls in love with the plot. You fall in love with the character, right? That's what gets people reading. And so now that I've got these 3 women established in 3, now 4 books, I'm writing the 5th one. It's like I enjoy spending time with them, so I'm just going to keep writing them until I don't. Yes. Until I think that I've not got anything else to say about their outlooks on life and challenges that they're facing. So I love it. It's actually the most fun I've had. Writing. That's all at the moment. I wrote like The Great Silence. I wrote it in lockdown. I started it about a month after I had a stroke, and I wrote it in like about 4 months. And it was the best time because I could get away from the hideous lockdown, pandemic, stroke recovery world and just put myself in a fictional world and just like deal with these 3 women and their problems. So I found that kind of like therapy in a way. It's beautiful.
Well, without digging too deep, and I don't want to ask you too much about it, you just mentioned it. You had a stroke. Yes. I mean, you're fully firing on all cylinders and you're back to health. But do you know what happened there? I mean, was it just completely random? Have you been able to trace why it happened?
Yeah, they have. Yes. So I had. It turns out I was walking up Arthur's Seat and I started to feel dizzy and then I vomited everywhere and it turned out I was having a stroke. I thought it was a migraine or something at the time. I didn't really know. And it turns out they think, because I don't have any of the sort of risk factors for a stroke, like diabetes and health is fine generally, but I think it's probably that I had a hole in the heart, which is a thing that is very common. Apparently 1 in 5 people have it, and most people don't know they ever have it. So they did a test, and it means that you've got a flappy bit in the middle of your heart. I'm doing the action now for people listening to the podcast. And what they think is that a blood clot from my body, if it comes into your heart, it goes out and into your lungs, which absorbs clots. This is all
stuff that you've learned.
Every day is a learning day, right? Yeah. But if it goes through the hole into the other part of your heart, it then goes straight to your brain. So that's how I had a stroke. So I had a blood clot in the cerebellum at the back, in the first bit of my.
Well, it seems like I mean, you hear stroke, you hear heart attack, anything like this, and you immediately think of fatalities or serious health problems. But it's been a sort of lucky escape in a way.
You're trying to cheer me up, Vic.
I'm trying my best to deal with a dark subject.
Death. Yeah. No, but I mean, so I had an operation to close up the hole in my heart, and I'm on blood thinners and stuff like that. So I mean, life expectancy is reduced for stroke victims, but at the same time, I feel as healthy as I've ever been. Yeah. Partly because I've been drinking lots of great whiskey.
Well, this is it. I mean, let's move on, shall we? Okay. But I'm delighted because obviously, I've known you for many years, and sort of saw you relatively soon afterwards. I don't know, maybe 6 months afterwards or whatever, a few months, and you sort of dropped the news, and I was kind of taken aback. And then invited you on the podcast, and you were like, no, I'm drinking whiskey, I'm listening to music, so that's all good. Right, last dram is called Spice Wreck. Yes. And shall I just say, Terra Firma, in case I can't remember if I did read out the number, it's 44.154, so 44154 for Terra Firma, the last dram. This is 13812, so 13812, and it's called Spice Wreck. It's a first fill, 3rd char barrel, number 3 char barrel, aged 6 years. It's 57.1% alcohol volume, and I mentioned right at the top of the podcast, it's from Taiwan.
Yes.
I've never had whiskey from Taiwan.
I don't think I have either.
I'm going to read a couple of the lines of the tasting notes. The cask had the upper hand here initially, we thought. It opened with notes of smoked pencil shavings, graphite oil and natural tar. Then herbal scented embrocations, bacon frazzles and extra salty pork scratchings. Wee leathery and camphory touches emerged over time. And it goes on. Embrocations is a word that I don't think I've ever said out loud before. So apart from anything else, that's a first for me. So Taiwanese whiskey.
Yeah. I'll take a sniff of this.
Quite alcohol-y on the nose.
Yeah.
But you can smell. What did they say? That the cask had the upper hand. You can taste or smell the kind of woodiness. Right. Nice nose, actually. Maybe my favourite so far.
Oh. That is really nice.
Wow.
Do you know, it's interesting. I was like, I'm a huge fan of peaty whiskies, and like none of the four that we've had are peaty. That's not peaty, but it's...
Oh, it's got a hint of peat. It's got a hint of
there's something else going on.
it.
Like, I think of all these four, this is the one I would get a bottle of.
There you go. Taiwanese whiskey.
It's great.
Made in Taiwan.
Smoked cheese. I'm smelling smoke. You know that cheap smoked processed cheese?
Right, yeah.
I'm getting that. And bananas.
Yeah.
Like fried.
It definitely has a smokiness to it. It may not be.
Yeah.
It is the lightly peated profile.
Right, okay, yeah,
so it has got some peat to it.
Like
Very tasty. Now, I know nothing about the Taiwanese distillery it comes from, which I'm definitely going to investigate after this podcast.
It's definitely spicy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's chili. Ooh.
Any more in the tasting notes about that? Hot paprika, anchovy paste, olive tapenade, wormwood, smoked peppercorns.
There you go, yeah. Yeah, this is good.
So you're definitely the PT spot.
This is my end. This is my end
of
the whiskey flavouring. Yeah, definitely.
And you paired this up with Biffy Clyro.
Biffy Clyro.
My old pals.
Mon the Biff.
Yes,
I picked the song "Living Is a Problem Because Everything Dies," partly because I love that title.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use it for a short story or something at some point in my life. I love Biffy Clyro so much. I went to see them at the Big Top the weekend there in Inglestown. It was fucking phenomenal.
Yeah.
They're just unbelievable for like a band that's like 9 albums in or something now.
Oh yeah, at least
maybe more. They're just absolutely knocking it out of the park, and it's so good. Like we both saw them, I guess, even before the first record was out.
Well, they formed about 95. I've been on the radio since 99. I started playing their stuff around about then. The kids who pop today will rock tomorrow.
That was the Stowe College EP or whatever.
Yeah, and then they got a little deal, and I played them in demo form and all the way through. And I've never known a band, whether you listeners, whether you viewers, whether you like them or not, that band have worked their asses off all the way through. Yeah. They've toured. They've played to 2 men and a dog, then 10 men and a dog, then 100 men and 2 dogs, and then it's 300, then it's 500. They just went round and round and round. They kept writing songs, releasing records, and the tune that you've chosen, "Living Is a Problem Because Everything Dies," is from their 4th album, Puzzle, in 2007, which alone is 15 years ago. That was their kind of breakthrough album.
Well, that's partly why I chose this song, because this is a really ballsy whiskey, I thought. Yeah. They're a ballsy band who have absolutely been successful on their own terms. Like, they have not compromised one jot. I first saw them around about the same time, so 1999 or 2000, I saw them play the Liquid Rooms to about 50 people. Yeah. And they were one of the best live bands I'd ever seen in my life. They were so tight then. They were already then. The first album wasn't out, I don't think, or it was just coming out. There are a bunch of singles in that EP. But they were so good, and I was like, this is unbelievably good stuff. But what was interesting about their career was exactly like they worked their fucking asses off. And those first few records were on an indie label, and I think they're absolutely brilliant records, right?
Yeah, me too.
And there's Beggars Banquet, and Beggars put out a compilation of the singles from those albums, which is unbelievable. It's like hit after hit after hit, but they weren't actual hits.
They should have been hits.
They're just total bangers. Like they're all brilliant. But I'll tell you what, I went to see them at the weekend, and they didn't play a single song from those first 2 records. because their back catalogue is so fucking good now.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like they don't even need to go
Also,
there.
they must have played those early songs so many times they probably never want to hear them again.
Yeah. What was interesting about this record, Puzzle, was, like you say, this is the first time they went to a major label. It's like an offshoot of Warner's, and you know they could have mellowed out. They could have, you know, shaved off the rough edges. But this is the opening track on the album, and it's unbelievable.
It's hilarious. You must have seen them play it live.
Yeah.
So they have this kind of and then the stabs go bam, bam with strings, and I still to this day don't quite know. There must be someone's phone number or
as a
something.
drummer, I've worked it out, but it's hard. It's really hard. It's deliberately hard. It's deliberately obscure, and it's like basically 2 minutes of.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are you doing? It's like, Warners must have shat themselves when they heard this. They must have
But then it goes into this kind of amazing pop song.
Strings and like choirs and this unbelievable chorus, which is exactly what they've always done. They always had like weird time signatures, strange offbeat stuff, and then bang, killer choruses. Like, I mean, 3 or 4 songs they played at the weekend were like literally whoa, 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 and like the whole tent was going crazy for singing along to stuff. I mean, that's always been their remit, is massive pop tunes and weirdness combined, often in the same song.
You mentioned prog rock earlier on. I haven't seen the Biffy Boys because they're now massive. They used to come and play on my show all the time. They don't need me any longer, and I don't blame them. But I haven't seen them for ages. But one of the things we always used to talk about, obviously, is music. They're massive fans, and it would be proggy, off-kilter kind of stuff. Because I always loved the fact that they did that kind of stuff right next to a Lighters in the Air anthem. So a phenomenal band. This is a particularly good tune. I mean, they go from strength to strength. Now they have #1 albums. They headline Downloads and Sonosphere and Reading Festival. I don't think they've quite got to Glastonbury headliners yet, but if they keep going, I wouldn't be surprised in 5 years' time or something.
But you're absolutely right that no one deserves it more than these guys.
Yeah.
They're just I've interviewed them several times as well.
Couldn't be nicer. Yeah.
And they're just the nicest people on the planet, and yet they're making this music. I mean, we're lucky to be around at the same time as these guys. They're making music that I think is incredible. I mean, and still, they made their record in lockdown. You know, there's an Amazon documentary about the new record they made where they just went to farm and built a studio, like down the road from their old place in Ayrshire, and just made a record, like just 3 of them. Yeah. And it's a phenomenal record. It's like it's great. They can just fuck around like that. I love it. Yeah.
No, it's a great choice, and I think there are maybe some people who are a bit sniffy about the pop tunes. That, you know, one of the X Factor contestants covered them, for example, and I think that probably earned them, you know, an extra house each. But I think some people are a bit sniffy about that. But they've never shied away from the big choruses and then the quirky, odd, proggy bits.
Also, what's very annoying about them, having just seen them live, is that they are all in their 40s now and they're still totally shredded.
Oh yeah.
Tops off every gig. It's quite annoying.
I know, yeah. Mind you, I remember Lemmy from Motorhead talking about why he dyed his hair and his moustache and so on. No one wants to see someone with grey hair in a rock band. And I suppose, you know, if Biffy took their tops off and there were kind of bellies hanging over, it wouldn't look good. Just, you know, as we finish this dram, we finish the podcast, a little bit more about music, because you're a crime writer.
Yeah.
We've got to mention, like, when we met, I played in a band called Miracle Head with James Yorkson, previous guest on the podcast. You played in a band called Cheese Grater.
Cheese Core, you know the score.
Cheese Core, you know the score. Cheese Grater, though, you know, touches of Mudhoney and Dinosaur Jr. and that kind of thing. It was grungy, punky, rocky, kind of good fun music.
Yeah, is this you leading up to me talking about how I met Kurt Cobain, yeah?
I wasn't going to mention it, but seeing as you've dropped that clanger...
No, I won't. But
well, you've mentioned it. Cheese Grater on the scene at the same time as Miracle Head and various other bands, and we played on some 3-band bills and watched each other from afar and all that sort of stuff. But there was that famous... Nirvana played a couple of times in Edinburgh, and the road crew were from Edinburgh. And after the second time they played at the Colton Studios, there was a rumour going around. Kurt Cobain and Dave Grohl were going to play the Southern Bar. And I heard that rumour, and I was a massive fan. Obviously, I was at the gig, and I went, that's not happening. We went somewhere else. You went to tell us.
Well, the Southern was my local pub. Like, I lived around the corner in a flat in Sheens. It's literally 2 minutes away. And my flatmate worked behind the bar in the Southern. So I was in there every night of the week anyway. And the reason that this whole thing came about with the Southern was that our other flatmate, Murdo, who was in the Joyriders, who were a great indie band at the time, his brother Alex was Nirvana's tour manager. So Murdo is a bit older than us, and he'd been in the Cataract, who had supported Nirvana.
Amazing band, great band.
And Alex was like the tour manager for like Soundgarden and Mudhoney and Nirvana when no one knew who they were, and they were just like looking for gigs anywhere. And so they had a night off, and it was meant to be for charity. I don't know what was going on, but there was some like, well, let's go and play an acoustic show. So the idea was going to be at the Southern, and the Joyriders played a support set, and then it looked very like Nirvana hadn't turned up, and then it looked very much like they weren't going to turn up, and then Murdo came over to me and said, do you cheese grater guys want to go up and do a set? I was like, fucking no. Number one, people are expecting Nirvana.
Hi, we're not Nirvana.
Boo, get off. And number two, there's only 3 of us like out of the 5 band members, and we've never played an acoustic guitar in our lives, so no. But then it was like, I was okay. And then so Murdo eventually got up and said, because the place was packed, because they'd been handing out flyers at the Carlton Studios gig the night before, saying a mysterious band called Teen Spirit were going to play at the Southern. So it was absolutely rammed. And then Murdo got up and said, no, Nirvana haven't shown up, sorry, something's happened.
So everyone starts filtering.
So 90% of people left, and then 2 minutes later, Kurt and Dave turned up. And they played like an 8-song set.
Now, the amount of people that have said to me they were there, and I know they were lying, because there are admittedly not very many photos, but there are a couple of photos of that happening, and you're in one of them. It's you sort of gurning into the camera, or give me, and Kurt Cobain and Dave Grohl, a metre or so behind you. A little bit of rock history there.
It was so. I mean, I met Kurt, and he was a weird guy, wasn't he?
Yeah.
But he said to me, "Do you have any Benylin?" And I went, "No." So I obviously had a sore throat.
Right.
And then he walked on. Dave Grohl bought us all a pint. Nice guy.
Yeah.
But it was obviously at that time of the band where they were just getting famous. I think. Teen Spirit.
Teen Spirit had come out. Nevermind hadn't.
Yeah. And he was basically at the bar, and he opened his wallet, and it was just thick with fucking £20 notes.
Yeah.
And he just didn't know. He was like, that was his like per diem or whatever. He's like, does anyone want a drink? And we're like, yeah. Okay, yeah. So we started having a drink with Dave Grohl. Nice times.
Yeah, good. Well, Cheese Grater, Little Hopetown Giants. Loved that band that you were in. You released music on Fence Records as Northern Alliance. You were part of the Fence Collective, and you're doing your own solo stuff now as well. We should give that a mention. Crow Hill being the last record, the most recent one. Indeed. From 2021. Yeah. So songwriting still part of your life?
Yeah, I really enjoy that. I kind of dip in and out of it because the books are kind of the main priority now. But actually, I loved doing Crow Hill, a record. It was I just basically secreted myself away in the loft with a laptop and a bunch of stuff and like drums and guitars, because effectively that's where I write, but also my drum kit's there and guitars and amps are sitting around, in case I get bored. Yeah. And just I kind of had a bunch of songs, and that was a kind of record about the experience of having a stroke and the aftermath of it. But I just love that kind of. I'll tell you what the difference is. If I'm writing a book, like I check social media about once every hour. If I'm making a song.
Yeah, you don't like it. Yeah.
I go in at 9 o'clock in the morning, and suddenly it's like dinner time, like 8 in the evening, and I'm like, oh great! It's so much joy.
I make music still to this day, and I feel exactly the same way. It's the pure escapism.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And you're just mucking about with like different synth sounds, or one day getting your guitar pedals out, or looping stuff and whatever. It's just the time flies, and it's just the simple. Even if you don't even put it out. Yeah. The simple joy of making stuff like that is just, you get it.
I totally get it. I'm working on new music with my band at the moment, and I'm sure it will see the light of day at some point, but it's the process of doing it that is, it's maybe taken me to this age in life to realise that it's the doing it rather than the getting kudos from it that's the important thing. But also we have to mention before the podcast is over, because you are this esteemed crime writer with a 14th book about to come out, you're also part of a band, the Fun Loving Crime Writers.
Yes.
For people who may not know what I'm talking about, explain that, because that's good fun.
That is a band of crime writers. I'm the drummer, and it's me and Val McDermott and Mark Billingham and Chris Brookmeyer and Stuart Neville and Luca Vesti. Val and Mark and Chris and Stuart all do singing. Stuart's an incredible guitarist, unbelievable guitarist. Luca plays bass, Chris plays guitar, and Mark plays guitar as well. It's And so it came about 5 years ago. We were at a BoucherCon, which is a kind of crime writing convention in New Orleans, and they had an open mic night. and there was a house band, which was terrible. It must be the only 3 musicians
in New Orleans
who can't play. So they went for a break, and we sort of bum rushed the show. Me, Mark, and Stuart, and we played a couple of songs with a local drummer, this guy who's also a crime writer, Bill Lowfell. So I actually played guitar that night, and we played a couple of songs, Johnny Cash and the Proclaimers and something else, and it went really well. And like folk were loving it and dancing, and we came off stage, and I remember vividly saying to Mark and Stuart, like, we could do this back home. We could just form a band. I'll play the drums, because drummers are hard to come by. Guitarists, 10 a penny. But and we came back, and I mentioned it to Roland Gulliver, who ran the Edinburgh Book Festival in those days, and he just kind of booked us. We didn't really have a band, so then we had to. It's like a Field of Dreams scenario. We had to then like put the band together. So we enlisted. But at the same time, I'd also done music stuff with Val at Bloody Scotland has an open mic night. And Mark had done stuff with Luca, and I'd done stuff with Chris Brookmeyer. So we all kind of knew there was musical people around us, which I think is quite common. And so we kind of all coalesced into a thing. And our first gig at the Edinburgh Book Festival that year was just, I think a lot of people turned up expecting us to be terrible.
I've seen you, and it's it's cover versions and so on and so on, but it's good fun, and you can play. Well, you have this history of music behind you, and lovely people. I don't know them all. I know Val a little bit now because she was a guest on Malts and Music, and Chris Brookmeyer is a lovely fellow as well. I always have a chat with him if I see him. Great fun. Well, good luck with the new book, Black Hearts. Thank you for spending a bit of time with me on Malts and Music. It's lovely to be here in the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. When the cameras and the recording gear goes off, we're definitely not going to have another dram, are we?
Sure.
Good to see you, Doug. And a ballsy Taiwanese dram to finish off with a bit of Biffy Clyro as the soundtrack.
Excellent.
Good way to end it. Cheers.
Cheers.